Hello again, average moviegoers. Let's talk about The Secret Agent and whether it's a movie that should be brought to light or whether it's best kept secret. The Secret Agent is a Brazilian film set in 1977 Brazil, which the movie somewhat ironically calls a time of great mischief. If you're familiar at all, this is really understating the case, as it's a time characterized by a dictatorship and trickle-down corruption that made for a harsh and oppressive life, especially for our main character Marcelo, played by Wagner Moura, who I must also say isn't exactly a secret agent. This title is kind of playful, tongue-in-cheek, and you may catch on to a sense of humor found in this movie. It's not ha-ha funny, but it is humorous. If that's the one thing I can say about this movie, it would be how it juggles different tones. In some places, it's kind of like vibes, atmospheric, time and place movie, and then it can be brutally violent, and it can be really sincere and full of love and suspenseful and a little romantic about past pop culture, then emotional, some dread, sincerity. It definitely gives you a lot to chew on, and it's not always very straightforward. It doesn't hand you answers or themes on a silver platter. There are some choices in here that I think are a little more challenging and something that only an artist would do and wouldn't really be approved in a Hollywood script, which is what I love. And I hope more people expose themselves to. But while being as vague as possible, I'll say that this movie does explore the past from a contemporary lens and thus provides fertile ground to be able to recontextualize the events of this movie or analyze history as a concept and a discipline and what it means to have a connection to our past. It's very fascinating. It's very effective. I almost kind of want to get into spoiler territory, but I don't want to because I think people should see this movie. But there's a really bold choice where a pivotal plot point or an inflection point of the story is uncovered or explored or depicted in an unconventional way that completely subverts expectations and doesn't feel like it's cheating us out of emotional fulfillment at all. In fact, it somehow makes it even more powerful. There are some moments in the film that border on surreal or absurd or dreamlike. I feel like we're taking an excursion in the story, but then looking back on those moments, they provide a lot of rich detail and context to build out this world and are kind of like the keys to deciphering this film. I'm probably making it sound a little more enigmatic than it actually is. It is a straightforward narrative film that is accessible and tells a story, so I don't want to discourage anyone. You can definitely engage with this movie as a political thriller, but for those who want to go deeper, it's definitely there. So as I kind of mentioned, Wagner Moura isn't actually playing a secret agent. This isn't a spy or an espionage movie per se. It doesn't really play into the conventions of those genres. It's definitely more of a political thriller or a crime period drama. And that brings me to something really important, which is the production design. This movie transports you to a different time and place in a way that I haven't really felt many times this year. It stands in contrast with Ella McKay, which one of my main criticisms was that nothing about that world felt real at all. Whereas this movie, it's incredible to look at and be immersed in, and I really hope it gets awards attention for this production design. It is already getting awards attention for Wagner Moura's performance, which I'm totally on board for. I think he is so deserving. He's so charismatic and talented, and he has a difficult job in this movie because for as much as this character says, he also just has to look at things and you just have to see the wheels turning in his head and just see him react. And again, without spoilers, he has to reinvent his performance at different stages in this movie. And I just think he's so magnetic and endlessly rewatchable. The Secret Agent is able to fuse pop culture and history in a really interesting way. There's kind of an important reference to the movie Jaws and broader cinema in general that I think just kind of cuts through the seriousness of this movie with some fun and levity. The context and history of Brazil at this period in time reveals itself slowly. And initially, I thought that one of my critiques of the film would be that it assumed I knew more than I actually did. But what it was really doing was just revealing things in a really smart and systematic way to heighten the suspense. So There's kind of a mystery element and a suspicion that characters have of one another, where you have to read a lot of subtext in order to grasp what's going on. I think that is something that I do have to mention is this movie is 2 hours and 40 minutes. I didn't really know what this movie was going to be about for like the first hour of this film. So while I was enjoying the production design and some of the vibes, I was definitely intrigued, but I was also teetering in and out of engagement, and I was worried that the film wouldn't click. But obviously it did, so there's a massive caveat there. This movie rewards patience. Let me say that again. This movie rewards patience, which is a virtue that's being lost today. I think that the first hour or so is kind of an investment, but then after that, you just cash out for the next hour and a half in such a satisfying way that doesn't really feel bloated at all. If you want a point of reference, I'm hearing this movie compared to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I get why people are saying this, at least in terms of how it builds out a time period and fleshes out a world and how it's closely related to cinema. But I'd say that's kind of where the resemblance stops. And I think it's important to see this movie as the unique piece of art that it is, because I really haven't seen anything like it. There's a structural trick in this movie that I've alluded to, and I should mention it again because I do think it will be somewhat divisive and off-putting to some people. I, for one, was skeptical at first if this was too much of a stunt. Ultimately, I thought it was really well executed and really drives home the themes of this movie, but I really am curious how you guys felt about this decision. It kind of reminded me of The Zone of Interest, if that gives you a clue. Of course, we shouldn't just talk about Wagner Moura's performance, as this movie is a vehicle for a lot of good character acting, and in some moments, it even feels like it's entering ensemble territory, not because it literally is, but just because these characters show us so much depth and vulnerability in like a few lines or scenes. It just feels like everyone has such a rich backstory. Look, this movie isn't going to be everyone's cup of tea. I can see how some people would be like, Hayden, I can't believe you recommended this. It feels completely disjointed and unfocused and straight up weird. And I get that. I felt those things sometimes. You're not alone. But to be honest, I like when art makes me feel those things, or even makes me a little confused, or makes me scratch my head and wonder why someone would defy the conventions of traditional cinema and make certain decisions. Some of the times I come to the conclusion that it's not worth my time. And in cases like this, I'm totally on board. For example, sometimes I take notes during movies so I can write these reviews, but I didn't take notes about the movie this time. I wrote down things that I wanted to learn more about or look up or research about this time period, which for me makes for a successful movie-going experience. All right, you guys, that's it for me and the movie The Secret Agent. Let me know what you thought of this movie if you're planning on seeing it. I feel like I left something unsaid, so drop me a comment and maybe it'll jog my memory. It could be just the cinematography, because it goes without saying that it's gorgeous. It works perfectly with the production design. Maybe that was it. I don't know. But yeah, you guys, be respectful, be courteous, back up your opinions. Remember that art is subjective, and above all else, keep watching movies and stay average.